Tonight, a new round of airstrikes in Yemen, as the dust has yet to settle from the fallout over President Trump's national security team's Signal group chat.
Nobody's texting war plans.
Our expert panel from the CBN News team weighs in. And coming home.
We cleaned everything and start to plant everything, renew everything.
Some families in Israel seeking to rebuild after being forced to flee. Plus, bucking the trend.
Look, they've been fed a whole bunch of misinformation for a long time.
Why Gen Z is more drawn to Jesus than previous generations. Coming up on Faith Nation Friday. Hi, everyone, and happy Friday. I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, we are talking about the story that is captivating Washington and did all week the military plans accidentally texted to a reporter. It all happened over the messaging app called Signal. Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and other top administration officials all discussing plans about a pending airstrike in Yemen. They didn't realize Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic was also on the chat, accidentally added by National Security Advisor Waltz. Tonight's panel, senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright, national security correspondent Caitlin Burke, and podcast host of CBN's Navigating Trump 2.0, John Stolnis. Panel, welcome. So the White House, initially downplaying the story, President Trump said it was a mistake, but he ultimately stood with Walz. We're now learning, though, that he's growing pretty angry behind the scenes as the story continues to dominate the headlines. Caitlin, what struck you most about this from a national security perspective?
Jenna, this was a mistake. It was a big mistake. And the administration has made it clear that they're going to get to the bottom of it and they won't let it happen again. And I do believe that. I think ultimately there has been debate whether this was classified information, not classified information. The consensus among experts that I have spoken to and heard from is that this was information that we would not have wanted our adversaries to have gotten a hold of before the strikes. So whether it was technically classified or not, it was a big error. But, as the Trump administration has said, as the president has said himself, this appears to have been a process issue. The Biden administration allowed the messaging app Signal to be used for communications, whether it should have been used for this specific communication or not, won't get into. But the Trump administration now, I would assume, is going to nix that. CIA Director John Ratcliffe testified at a hearing this week, and he said that using Signal for communications was one of the first things that he was briefed on when he took the role. So I think that when it comes to the frustration with Waltz specifically, that makes sense. The president probably is getting more frustrated at this as this continues to dominate headlines. But I think, honestly, his bigger frustration with Waltz being involved in this right now is that, as we saw this week, the GOP has a very slim majority, and Waltz's seat in the House is currently up for grabs, and it's a surprisingly tight race. And so I don't think the president wants any bad optics right now as he's trying to hold on to Waltz's seat specifically. We saw that he pulled Representative Elise Stefanik back from a nomination to be the U.S. ambassador to the UN specifically because Republicans have such a slim majority. So I think bottom line, it was a big mistake. I don't think that they will let something like this happen again.
Yeah, that's a great point, that Walz's seat, it was given up, and then now they're short that Congress member. President Trump was also emphasizing that this was a successful mission. Kelly, the administration, though, they made a lot of major moves this week on tariffs, ongoing deportations, the arrest of leaders of notorious gangs, not to mention high-level visits south of the border and to Greenland. This Signal story, though, is really what Washington is talking about. How much is this burying the president's agenda?
I don't think it's bearing the president's agenda. The president is moving forward with exactly he wants to do, Jenna. That is to make sure that the whole of government is dealing with fentanyl, make sure that the whole of government is dealing with Tren de Aragua. And the other thing that's taken place that I would say in light of this is the major media that's focusing on the signal operation and the leak that has taken place. And there are questions that should be raised, of course, in terms of that information being on signal. And the Democrats have been doing a very skillful job in attacking members of the president's cabinet and the president pushing back. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt answering the question that so far she sees no one who would be held responsible in terms of firing them. They have an important role to play. And they're moving on. You're looking at Kristi Noem, who, of course, is the Homeland Security Secretary, traveling to El Salvador at the same time that Tren de Aragua detainees are being sent there. And then a major bust of an MS-13 leader, 24 years old, being captured by the FBI and a whole group of law enforcement in Northern Virginia. And the attorney general being present for that, as well as the FBI director. So there's a lot of news coming out of this White House, but the mainstream media has been focusing on this signal leak. And the bottom line is that leak came out, but it was also something that was overlooked in all of this, is that the success of that operation had already taken place. But certainly Pete Hegseth, Mike Walls, they have a lot to address in terms of what kind of operation they'll be using to communicate with each other on critical matters like this.
Yeah, you know, Kelly, the signal story has all of us talking here in Washington, but, you know, for people spread out across America, what do you think they're talking about? Does this matter as much to them?
I don't think so. Most of the people are looking exactly what we were just showing. Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, going to El Salvador, to that high-powered security prison, talking to the president of El Salvador, Bukele, about the efforts to continue attacking or going after Tren de Aragua, operating in this country as a terrorist organization. The same thing with MS-13. A lot of people who voted for this president voted for him to get rid of illegal immigrants, especially the hardened criminals. And that's exactly what he's done and continues to do. So I think a lot of people who are in his base support him on a promise delivered.
From a messaging standpoint, John, I want to bring you in here. The response, you know, it wasn't always clear on the signal issue. We have a clip that I want to play, and then, John, we'll get you to weigh in on that. Let's go ahead and listen.
There was no classified information, as I understand it.
Nobody's texting war plans.
They're now playing word games because they know this was sensationalist spin.
We have never denied that this was a mistake.
Did this conversation at some point include information on weapons packages, targets, or timing?
Not that I'm aware of.
So it's your testimony that less than 2 weeks ago, you were on a signal chat that had all of this information about F-18s and MQ-9 Reapers and targets on strike, and you in that 2-week period simply forgot that that was there. That's your testimony?
My testimony is I did not recall the exact details of what was included there.
All right, John, you know, hindsight, of course, always 20/20. Do you think this story might have lost some of its steam if officials had just really followed the president's lead, said this was a mistake, we stand with Mike Waltz, moving on? Instead, we saw in that clip a lot of them getting pretty defensive.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they should have gotten on a signal chat to coordinate their messages a little bit better in the aftermath of this, because they were all over the place, especially in the first 48 hours. The testimony by DNI Gabbard and CIA Director Ratcliffe before the Senate Intelligence Committee on Tuesday, I believe it was all over the place. And even Gabbard and Ratcliffe were offering different explanations and different amounts of culpability as to whether or not they were even on the chat. I think, you know, what we're seeing from the Trump administration is their motto has always been, always be on the attack. Don't admit culpability. You need to always be attacking. That's anytime you're on the defensive, you're losing. But I think one of the most important keys in crisis communications, and that's what this is for this White House right now. This is crisis communications, is to be honest, be upfront, to take responsibility for something if it is indeed, if there was a screw up. And the administration has admitted, most corners of the administration has admitted that this was a screw up. So, okay, you've messed up, take responsibility, own it, talk about how you're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. What steps are you now going to put in place to make sure that you don't share sensitive information, whether it's classified, secret, sensitive war plans, attack plans, however you want to phrase it? If the enemy had gotten this information at the time that everyone else got it, it would have been detrimental and potentially deadly to the very successful attack that ended up taking place. So acknowledging that, understanding that, and then trying to explain to the American people and to show we're taking responsibility, we're holding our people accountable, no one's losing their jobs yet on this. If this happens again, they will, and here's what we're going to do to fix it and make it better so that you can be sure we are protecting your national security.
Yeah, President Trump has made it clear he's standing with his guys. We'll see what happens. Just a few seconds left. Kelly, where does this story go from here? Will we be talking about it next week?
I don't think so. I think the White House knows what it has to do. The cabinet certainly knows what it has to do. And as Caroline Levitt pointed out, getting to what John was just discussing, there were no deaths in this. If you recall, as Caroline Levitt had that White House briefing, she pointed how the last administration and its reckless disengagement from Afghanistan had 13 people killed, 13 service members, and no one really took up any responsibility or accountability for that.
All right. Panel, thank you very much. We have Caitlin, John, and Kelly, all of you. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, coming up, forced to flee after an onslaught of rocket attacks. Some Israelis are finally getting a chance to return home. Next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. Israeli airstrikes rocked Beirut today, the first attack on the Lebanese capital since the November ceasefire with Hezbollah. Israel's military says it was responding to rockets fired from Lebanon earlier in the day. One was intercepted, the other fell short. The strikes began in southern Lebanon, then hit a Hezbollah drone site in Beirut's southern suburbs. Israel says it's the second rocket attack in a week, and tensions are quickly rising.
I'm sending a clear message from here to the Lebanese government. If you do not enforce the ceasefire agreement, we will enforce it. We promised peace and security to the residents of the Galilee, and so it will be.
Meanwhile, Israel continues its operation against Hamas in Gaza, overnight killing a spokesperson for the terror group. Israel ended a 2-month ceasefire with Hamas on March 18th, resuming airstrikes and ground operations in the territory. Gaza's health ministry, which is run by Hamas, says the escalation has killed more than 850 people. Well, this escalation with Lebanon has shattered months of calm along Israel's northern border. After more than a year of Hezbollah rocket attacks, evacuated families have just begun returning home. Many are ready to rebuild, but some remain cautious, unsure of the potential danger ahead. CBN's Chuck Holton takes us to one city where the recovery is just beginning.
The last time our CBN News crew visited Kiryat Shimona in Israel's north, it was a virtual ghost town, and rocket attacks from Hezbollah were an everyday reality.
Fine line between brave and stupid. Here we go again. Here we go again. Get down, get down.
Now, with 2 months of relative peace, more than 60,000 Israelis displaced from their homes are able to return. Life, though, is far from normal as businesses struggle to reopen with only a fraction of residents back home.
We had to evacuate from Bet Hillel. We couldn't stay here. The army asked us to leave Bet Hillel because they're afraid from the bombs.
Hope is budding along with spring, although there are still concerns things may never be the same.
In the first week, I couldn't stop crying all the time. Until the hostages come home, our joy will not complete.
This farm outside Kiryat Shimona, just a few miles from the Lebanese border, is known for these beautiful oranges and the pecans that they grow here. But right now, they're having a hard time finding anybody to come and help them harvest these things. These trees are full of fruit right now, but the foreign-born workers that usually come from Thailand and elsewhere to help them, many of those guys have already moved on to other jobs. And so they are hoping that they can get people to come back and help them get their fruit to market. Now the family's working to rebuild and welcome guests again.
we cleaned everything and start to plant everything, renew everything, and now people start to come back.
For those who have returned, hope remains their region can be rebuilt and return to normal.
To see people come here is amazing. To come back, to see everything come to life again, it's amazing. Sometimes I just stare and speechless of what's happening here.
I'm at the extreme northern border of Israel, just north of the town of Metula, which has been a ghost town for the last 15 months. But now people are starting to come back because if you see that fence right there, that's the border. Just the other side of that is a village inside Lebanon where Hezbollah was firing rockets on a daily basis in here. But that village is nothing but rubble now. And for that reason, the people feel safer coming back home.
While the war, we were open. Meanwhile, all the Kiryat Shmona was evacuated. We basically was the one business that working. We give serve to the police, the military, the soldiers.
This shawarma shop in the center of town was the only restaurant to stay open for the entire war.
Maybe 30% of Kiryat Shmona community has come back because the evacuation has been longer. So some people has stayed in the hotels, and I hope everyone will come back soon.
Even those who have realize the war is not over.
I cannot tell you the feeling. Now I'm talking with you and I'm starting to cry because I think about all the people that they cannot come back, and about the families and the babies that murdered there. And I love Israel very, very much. I don't want to leave Israel.
From northern Israel, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Chuck, thank you. Coming up, Jesus and Gen Z, how the next generation is turning to God, and the role of Christian media in reaching them. While Christianity in America continues to decline, the up-and-coming generation may change that trend, according to a recent report by Barna. 77% of American teens say they are somewhat motivated to learn about Jesus throughout their life. Among those, 52% say they are very motivated. And earlier this week, I spoke with Troy Miller, president of the National Religious Broadcasters, about the opportunities the open generation creates for Christian media. Take a look. And here now for more is Troy Miller, President and CEO of National Religious Broadcasters. Troy, welcome. So what do you make of these latest numbers, a seeming openness among Gen Zers to faith and Christianity?
Well, first, I'm really excited about them. I mean, that's shows that there's a lot of questions and a lot of hope out there in society. We have a study coming out from Barna as well that says about 2/3 of Americans consume some sort of Christian media throughout the week. And we think a lot of that is really growing in the Gen Z and the younger millennials. Look, they've been fed a whole bunch of misinformation for a long time. And then they get out there and they're finding that the culture really doesn't have the answers that they think it should have for them. And so that's opened up. They want to know. So this hope, this desire that's in all of us to know God. And so we're just excited about it because we think it makes a great time for Christian communicators.
Troy, what is the best way for Christian media to reach this generation?
Okay, I think one of the first things they need to do is hire Gen Zers, hire people from this generation. They know, what their peers are looking for. They know the platforms that their peers are on, and they know how to communicate to them. So get some Gen Zers in there. There's a lot of great Christians in that generation doing some things on their own. There was a group just the other day I heard about. They were a group of gamers, right? And so we're getting together, 5 people from different countries. One of them was a Christian, and he said, hey, guys, would you mind joining me for a Bible study before we start playing our game? And that has, I guess, grown into over 200 people are now in that Bible study. So look at people from the generation, figure out how they're communicating, and then be on the platforms they're on.
Let's talk about Christian media overall. What role does it play, Troy, in today's vast media landscape? And by vast, I mean it's podcasts, it's YouTube, it's traditional TV, it's you name it. It's vast.
It's the wild, wild west of media now, you know, because as we turn around every day it seems like there's some new, you know, distribution platform coming out, but so many of them on digital today. There was a recent report, I think it was in Broadcast and Cable, that said about a third of people still consume over cable, telco, satellite kind of systems. About a third of people, or just under a third, get just over-the-air broadcasting, and then 36% get digital, some form of digital streaming or that. And so it's really a broad landscape for Christian communicators to figure out how to navigate. How do we navigate that? How do we go from traditional broadcast to streaming? How do we go from a longer form to short form? But it's an exciting time because it's a great time. This is the only time in human history that we can instantly communicate to anybody around the globe. That's never existed in human history, but today it does. And it gives us a big responsibility. We have a big responsibility to be the voice of the gospel.
Yeah. You know, I think podcasts and these different platforms are taking off so much because they're long-form conversations, they're less scripted, and it's very authentic, and people really say what they're feeling, and you get a sense of who they really are.
Yeah, I think I saw another study recently that the trust factor for podcasters was almost 3 times that of what it is for mainstream media. And also Christian media has a very high trust factor as well. And so again, something that we really have to take the responsibility for and to keep up. But you're right, you look at this long form, you look at these different avenues, you look at the last election. Look, the last election, the mainstream media didn't play as big a role as they played in the past. So legacy media was really set off to the side.
Yeah, Donald Trump, he went on some of those Joe Rogan type podcasts, and it made a huge difference. All right, Troy Miller of NRB, it's always good to see you. Thank you for coming in the studio today.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
Finally tonight, you've heard of emotional support dogs, cats, maybe even horses, but here is a new one. How about an emotional support skunk? Meet Mr. Sushi. He's a fully domesticated, de-scented skunk and a registered emotional support animal in Iowa. At only 10 months old, Sushi's owner is working towards getting him certified as a therapy animal. Iowa is one of only 17 states where you can legally own a domesticated skunk. Mr. Sushi's owner says skunks are misunderstood, adding they're extremely social and very sensitive. All right, have a great night, everybody, and a great weekend.